everyone. This is the beautiful
Hi.
Steph, and she is going to be my co-guide. Probably I'll be adding the jokes. This is my French dog. Okay.
And this is my French rabbit. Hey, baby.
Hi, Boo. Bonjour, Boo.
He's currently eating some cardboard.
So we have never done this before, okay? So just so everybody knows, we are virgins to this live action. All right? So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
We can't promise anything. I mean, literally, who knows which way it's going to go.
Yeah. My dog's already crying about it. Relax, Eminem. So we're gonna start talking about all things Paris, and of course, right away, yeah, of course you can tell. Right away, I'm gonna give the phone over to Stephanie, and she's gonna start telling us a little bit about some other plague-like things that have happened in France. Okay.
Because, I mean, guys, you actually just have to accept it. You are going to die! No, because it isn't 1348. To be honest, we're okay. You've got to remember that plague is something which happens throughout European and world history. I don't know, every generation or so. Unfortunately, we just have to be living through this one. One of the most famous plagues probably to have hit Paris was the Black Death in 1348. One of my favourite plagues, actually, mainly because this was sort of like a double whammy of two types of plague, pneumonic and bubonic. So if you were really unlucky, you could get both. But normally, most people got the bubonic plague, which is the most famous one. It gets its name, bubonic plague, from buboes, which used to appear on the body at your glands, essentially. So in the neck, in your armpits, and sexily in your groin. Yeah, no, Karen, don't show us that one, please.
So everybody who has their kids, you know, remember we're in France, so you never know what you might learn.
But also, I mean, you know, general nudity is something which is absolutely acceptable here. I always say in France, if you want to sell naked ladies, use naked ladies. You want to sell a TV, use naked ladies. But, you know, Black Death. So essentially, spread by fleas, carried by rats, brought over once again from Asia. Just, they didn't really know about China in those days, so they couldn't call it like the Chinese virus, which we are not going to be calling on this podcast. Brought over by traders. Some people have speculated that it had been used as a form of warfare in the East and Middle East, though once again it's just one of those things that happen. You would develop fever, coughing, you would have blood coming out your eyes, pores, and every orifice. I think that sounds really fun compared to ours, but it was also massively fatal. 2/3 of the population of Europe was affected. Paris itself, it was estimated that from the 1348 until 1351, there was actually less than 1/3 of the city left after that great event. And interestingly, today, the city of Paris is actually built around certain areas touched by plagues. Any of you, when you've come to Paris, travelled on the metros? Karen, if you want to go to your map, can you show us Metro Line 10, please, if you have it on your map? Just, you know, because we like to use visual aids, as we say in the ad. So the Metro Line 10 is the metro line that goes over through the right bank, starting at Austerlitz.
Around there.
So left bank, Austerlitz, starting at Austerlitz. Yeah. And it goes from Austerlitz right the way to the southern part of the city, and then finishes off around the Bois de Boulogne. Now, if you look at the metro, essentially it's pretty much a straight line. It goes Austerlitz, Giseux, Cardinal-le-Moine, Odéon, and then there's this sudden bloop. There's a circle, and then it carries on going straight again. And this is essentially because around the area that you have Sèvres, Babylone, going down to Pasteur, there was a plague pit there. You've got to remember that Paris in the medieval period was absolutely tiny, and they would bury people extramura. This means outside of the city in
Even
the 1300s.
Even the babies?
Yeah, everyone. Well, this is when the plague first hit in 1348. All the Christians wanted to be buried by the churches, which were in the city. However, in those days, you didn't really have single graves. You didn't even have your own coffin. They had communal coffins. You had to hire the guild of coffin makers to carry you in your coffin to the graveyard. Then they would just dump you in a big pit. But all the Christians wanted to be buried by the church. But starting from 1348, really going to 1349, when there was the real height of the plague, so many people were dying. They would fill up the pits too quickly. And also, you know, then it got a little bit nasty. The bodies used to liquefy into matric acid, which is, I must admit, guys, I used to be a nurse, so I find anything like pus, acid, bodies, love it. And essentially they discovered very quickly that that was another way of spreading disease. So they started burying them outside. Also, if you go up to the area around Montmartre, they also had areas there. So once again, the line 12 and the line 13 both have to branch around plague pits in the city. So it left its mark quite a lot. On the other hand, unlike today, where the Pope has said that you can pray to God at home and he's definitely going to listen to you. Thanks, Pope. In those days, they all went to church. So actually, these churches, Notre Dame, things like that, were major breeding areas for the Black Death. Luckily, we don't have to worry about that quite so much today. But also, the Black Death was not simply one period. It wasn't just 1348 to 1351. It carried on sort of every 5 or 6 years. There'd be a little flare-up in individual areas. People would die. Everyone else would go shopping. That's pretty much how it would have worked. And life would continue. It became part of daily life. However, plagues and pandemics themselves can actually become quite revolutionary aspects. I'm wearing my beret today. There's a little hole in it. It's because Boo ate half my beret. Actually, nothing is safe when you have a rabbit, unfortunately. In 1832, Paris actually was riddled with cholera. There was around 10,000 people who were affected. Sorry, 10,000 deaths. About a third of the city, so that's almost 40,000 people were affected. And it caused a revolution, which is going to end up seeing the last king of the French put on the throne. That is Louis Philippe. And if you go to places in the Marais, for example, there's a little road which is called today called the Rue des Barres. It's just behind the church, Saint-Gervais, Saint-Protier, not far from, if you've done the Jewish tour with Karen, the store where you have the creamy love puffs. It's not far from there. And the Rue des Barres today actually was, right up until 1832, known as La Rue Mortelle, literally meaning the deathly street or the deadly street. And it was because essentially in the olden days, when people, if they were going to die, they wanted to die near a church, they would be laying out in the streets. Unfortunately, because so many people died in 1832, it was an absolute tragedy. They decided this was really unsanitary, and they also decided to change the name of the street to make it so that people wouldn't want to die quite so close to the church. Which shows you how actually pandemics can shape the nature, the urban fabric, if you like, of a city. I'm hoping that they're probably going to rename my street here Road of the People Who Don't Give a Monkeys about public health or safety, because there are people walking out of here happy as Larry, enjoying themselves completely.
We don't really understand why people are not understanding, but they do say that almost 80% of the French people, or 74% as of yesterday, are staying at home.
Yay!
Yeah.
Well, it's because Canal Plus is free.
Yeah.
So finally, cable has gone free in France, and everyone's decided that it's okay. So, I mean, what also we can hope with something like this and pandemics is that it can engender this sort of idea of liberty, equality, and brotherhood. You've got to remember that the French Revolution, from where these words came out of, was also a moment, if not of disease pandemic, but certainly illness at the heart of the French social system. You could say, you know, there was rotten monarchies running the country, unkind nobility, impoverished people starving in the streets. That's going to lead to the revolution. So maybe out of this as well, a new spirit of liberty and equality and brotherhood will be born.
And it might happen in other countries if people don't want to, you know, be affected by having their governments decide whether or not they should stay home or not stay home for the betterment of the country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, well, maybe we changing the French national anthem. You know, the whole "Allons en enfants de la patrie." Who knows? Maybe they'll be changing that. Be like something a little bit more patriotic. Let's not water the blood or the fields with the blood of our children.
Exactly.
Maybe something like "Let's eat baguettes together in the street and be happy."
Exactly.
Just my opinion. So obviously this is like our first podcast. We didn't really know how we wanted to do it. We just wanted to communicate with people, let you know we're still alive and still thinking about Paris as a city. So for future ones, if you want to help us give any direction, ideas, or even just themes that you want us to talk about. Go ahead.
Does anybody have any questions who is there right now? You'll be the first person to ever have any question. Anybody out there? Is anybody out there? Oh, it says, hang on, we're telling more followers to join your video. Well, that's cool.
Yay! That's always cute. We have an entire host of tours, documents, visual aids, they say in the answers.
We can talk pretty much about anything you'd want to talk about that has to do with Paris. We just want to know what you're yearning for. And if you have kids at home, and you want to, you know, learn some French vocabulary. For example, this in French is
Un nounou.
A what?
Un nounou.
Okay, and very famous. There's giant ones all over the world now. Everybody's doing this whole big giant bear thing. And this started in the 13th arrondissement in Paris, putting out these giant bears. They were like, you know, look like that. And the owner of one cafe was sick of everybody talking about politics, talking about sadness, talking about horrible things in the world. And he said, you know what? Let me throw a bunch of bears around the neighborhood and see if it changes the light of people. And now they have a Facebook page. They're very famous. You can see them at cafes. You can see them, you know, almost everywhere. So the Nounous de Gobelin. And I will post that page later on. And that is a bear. And French kids call this a doo-doo. Okay, so every French kid has a doo-doo. And they, you know, kind of like a security blanket. And they all have them for many, many years. And doo-doo comes from do-do, which means go to sleep. So dormir. So if you know the Frere Jacques song, you know, are you sleeping? So that's where that comes from. Okay.
Which is absolutely why I don't have children. Ever.
So it's fun because a lot of people don't realize that French is so close to English. So this is a crab in English. Stephanie, what is that in French?
Tondo.
Wait, what else? It's a crab. Same thing with an accent. Crab.
You really want me to go un crab?
Well, yeah, well, they say that.
Okay.
You know, that's totally normal. You know, yeah, there's the spider crab, the araignée, okay, but there's plenty of words in French that it's just like it is in English, okay? So there's also the regular old dog, and we do have 250,000 dogs in the city of Paris. And when you have a dog, everybody throughout the world, this is your chance to get outside, even if it's only a tiny bit. This is your excuse to breathe fresh air and take your dog out for a little tiny walk around your neighborhood without getting near anybody, actually.
Or your rabbit. I took the rabbit out on the leash the other day.
And nobody tried to take it to eat it?
No, but the policeman was like, are you serious? I'm like, wee. I was like, he really needs to walk. I mean, it was actually me sort of like dragging him along, but you know, it was my motivation as well.
Did you have the paper printed? Because you guys know in France we have to have a printed paper saying, oh, Stephanie's going to get it, where you have to say where you're going, what you're doing. Turn it around. Turn it up. It's upside.
It's not. It's not. Oh, it's right way around.
Okay, so you have to have your name, and you're supposed to carry your identification, whether you're going to the supermarket or the pharmacy or, of course, the cigarette place.
And you also need to have the time that you went out, because you're now only allowed to walk 1 kilometer. That's about a quarter of a 3/4 of a mile around your house, and you can only be out for a maximum of an hour at a time.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be out maximum of an hour a day. We don't go out more than 20 minutes, half hour maximum. It's hard on the kids, like everybody. That's why we're trying to do something like this, you know?
So in terms of having gardens, if you have a garden, because a lot of buildings have sort of internal courtyards where you have gardens and things like that, you can go into there. But once again, it's limited. And me and my neighbour, we've been going out and letting her little girl run around. We've been picking daisies to feed them to the rabbit and things like that. But even there, you've got to be 1 meter apart. The kids can't play together unless you're brothers and sisters. So even within your own garden, apparently there's controls that you have to follow.
All right, looks like people are asking some questions, so let me see here.
Yeah. So it's quite good. I mean, I've got a little garden in my building, and we've been growing some really stunted onions and loads of white garlic.
Exactly.
So, I mean, if we all want to stink together, we're going to be fine.
So, somebody asked, hold on. Yes, hopefully positive changes will come from this, because, you know, let's hope this isn't a new way of life forever. I love that Sari would listen to us read the phone book. Well,
so just
if only they made phone books anymore, but that's great, Sari. I love that.
It's tragic. So just responding, because Sunny asked about the Black Plague and flu in Paris. So actually, in the medieval period, that's where the word quarantine was invented. And it actually comes from the fact that to stop the spread of the Black Death, any boats which were coming in from foreign countries would have to spend 40 days, quarantine, 40 days, not even 14, sailing to make sure that if anybody had the disease on the boat, they weren't going to bring it ashore, because they'd all be dead on the boat. From the time you begin developing symptoms of the Black Death until the time you died could be anywhere between 3 days to 7 days. It was a really, really quick acting disease. You normally got buboes within the first 48 hours. And then you get a massively high fever. If you were lucky and your buboes popped, you probably survived. If not, you didn't. So what people started doing, what the authorities started doing, is the minute one person in a family showed signs of having the disease, they would barricade the family into the entire house and let them all die in the house. One of the most horrific outcomes of this was after the plague had passed, people would open up the old houses that had been barricaded up and, you know, find whole families gone in the houses. After the Spanish flu was a little bit different. You've got to imagine that Europe was just coming back from was at the end of World War I. You've got high levels of malnutrition. You have soldiers who are wanting to get home as quickly as possible. Europe needs to rebuild. And actually, one of the most incredible things, there was a Scottish doctor who was commissioned by the British to deal with the virology of the Spanish flu. And essentially, he was just like, there's nothing I can do. The government once again introduced mask wearing. They didn't really have such a thing as social distancing in those days. People still went out. People had to go to work. If you had it, essentially, you would be cared for by your family at home. They did stop people going to hospitals in the end because they just couldn't deal with it. But if you think about it, the Spanish flu was responsible for the death of over 18 million people. So if you think about what we're facing now, this to compared to that problem. But also you've got to imagine that one of the reasons that this has not been as yet so deadly as the Spanish flu, which interestingly should not be called the Spanish flu because it didn't come from Spain. So if we're going to be talking about, let's say, racial identification of illnesses, we shouldn't call it the Spanish flu. But essentially, people were, I say, undernourished. Medical facilities had been completely used up for World War One. Also, people were suffering from the effects of the war in other ways. You've got people who, during the war, slipped into poverty. Right. You've got people whose mental and physical health suffered as well during this period of privation. So the government also itself was exhausted, so didn't deal with it in the same way as our governments are doing today. They actually, ironically, had to get people out there and working rather than telling them to all go inside. Exactly. There's different motivations for the government. I mean, essentially, you can say, if we look at the polarization of the politics today, first of all, you could say that Europe is going down the 1348 path. America is trying to go for the 1918 path. This idea of keeping economies going at a time when there's already been a downturn, trying to get people working to avoid a major recession. Okay.
So, do your healthcare workers have enough protective equipment? In the U.S.,
no.
Is a problem now, Pittsburgh, PA, yeah.
So we've had up until now 5 deaths of doctors in France.
Yeah.
It's a massive problem.
Italy had 13 in one day. And, you know, all my Italian friends, we know France is going to get hit. It goes up, of how many cases of people are sick, it goes up by 4,000 pretty much daily. So a friend of mine is in med school. He got called in on Thursday. They asked him to come Monday, but he has a 88-year-old grandmother, and she's the only one he has, so they've given him a couple days off. He may have to go. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know.
But the government has been, I mean, here has been criticised for lack of PPE, mainly because they also don't think that it's being distributed properly. You've got to remember that France has now 3 big centres for the outbreak, which is the Ile-de-France, which is where me and Karen live. It's Mulhouse, which is around northeastern France, the border with Germany. It's that sort of area, Strasbourg and that sort of area. And then also in the Alps, mainly because all these Parisians were like, yay, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade while skiing, and then took it down there.
Yeah, a lot of
they have been looking.
A lot of people went out to the country. However, you know, we have neighbors who went and their kids were bored and now they're back. So who knows what happened between that one trip and back. So that's crazy. That's crazy.
So, I mean, it's something at the end of the day, but you can't, I think, accuse the French of not being absolutely obsessed. When I got an ear infection last year, the doctor gave me 37 bottles of antiseptic fluid. I'm basically showering in this stuff. I've got enough to last me for the foreseeable future, so I'm fine.
Right. However, you know, if you want to talk about the French, you know, showering and bathing, that used to be such a stereotype that they didn't, you know, bathe. And I always say with enough Chanel, you know, everybody smells good. But I married a Frenchman. He smells just fine. However, they weren't using soap because they didn't think they were afraid of the water. Stephanie, can you talk a little bit about Louis XIV and not bathing?
Well, so actually, the French bathing, or say the French lack of bathing, actually goes back to the 500s.
Oh.
This is when a barbarian called Clovis, well, late 400s, early 500s, he comes in. They came from Belgium, from Francia, and they were barbarians. They were Franks, where the word French came from, and they believed that real men didn't bathe. So, you know, ironically, they're all sort of blonde-haired, blue-eyed, rugged, kind of like Thor, but more rancid.
Like
And they come in, they took over Roman Paris. Roman Paris had 3 bathhouses. Everyone in the Roman world bathed. Men, women, young people, old people, rich people, slaves, you name it. Everybody bathed. It was a way of social unity. The barbarians come in, they're like, oh, hell no, deodorants for losers. And so then the thing about Clovis as well is he became a Christian. And the Christians in this period believed that water was used for religious purposes only, and bathing didn't count as a religious purpose. So it sort of falls out. This is not to say that in the medieval period people didn't really bathe. This is untrue. They maybe bathed like twice a year or on special occasions. One of the most famous ones being Michaelmas. You would have a Michaelmas bath. Which is when on St. Michael's Day, which is the middle of September, you would traditionally have a bath on that day. Also, gentlemen, you know that Paris was a centre for the ladies of the night. Well, it was quite traditional when you went to meet your special lady friend who was going to pay for her company, that she would bathe you as part of the, well, you know, the je ne sais quoi, before it all started happening. And they would essentially bathe together. It was a more sort of quasi-erotic thing rather than actually being clean. So in the medieval period they did bathe. But if you're talking about getting actually clean, very few people cared about this. Louis XIV died at the age of 77 years old. We have it on record that he had less than 30 baths in his entire life. And I mean like proper immersive dunking in water baths. There's a reason for this. Firstly is he was hydrophobic. Fun fact, he was scared of water. This comes from when he was in his mid-teens. He was having a party, a little bit of a mess around with his brother in the Palais Royal, which is in the middle of Paris, not far from the Louvre. And in the middle there's a massive fountain. He was pushed into that fountain, almost drowned, and became afraid of water. So in terms of immersive baths, he pretty much stops at that point. But that's not to say that he didn't try and get clean every day. He would have ablutions. Ladies and gentlemen, ablutions was a quasi-religious / sanitary measure. Essentially, early in the morning when the king woke up, his priests and his doctors would come into his bedroom first of all. He would hop out of bed, put on his pantaloons, his silky undertrousers, and then he would sit on le trône percé. This is literally a throne with a hole in the middle. He would do his waist. The doctors would come in, they would taste his urine. Yeah. Thing called urinoscopy. They would study the taste of his urine to see if there was any salt or sweetness or bitterness in the urine. Then they would smell the rest to see if it was healthy. Then they would give him his ablutions, which they would take a mixture of orange water, perfume, vinegar, and alcohol. They would douse him face, hands, neck, even the inside of his mouth.
Exactly. Ew.
Yeah. And this was a religious act, so that he could then be clean to say his prayers. After that, he'd say his prayers, and then, if you were really lucky, gentlemen of the court, you would be able to place a white linen shirt over the king. It was believed this white linen shirt would suck all the dirt out of his pores, and the king actually bathed, or let's say had a dry bath, 8 times a day. He changed his shirt 8 times a day. That's as clean as he got. Okay. Louis XV, he was a little bit cleaner. He probably bathed once every 2 weeks. And that's because having a bath in the 1700s was an absolute mission. I don't know if any of you have read Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. Essentially, she'd like to describe Jamie having a bath. I've told her it's not quite right. But essentially, having a bath, it would take you 3 to 4 hours to heat up the water, enough to have a bath. You would get it really, really sort of piping, lobster boiling hot. You would sit in a really tiny little bath, literally curled up, and you would be doing this in your boudoir. So the word boudoir is not a fancy lady's bedroom, guys. Boudet in French is the word to sulk or to have a stress.
Okay.
And it comes from the fact that you spent 3 hours waiting to have this bath. You're going to be in it for about 3 hours. And the day before and the day after your bath, they're going to take about a pint of blood.
Why?
This is because they believe the body was made of 4 humours: blood, bile, phlegm, and water. And if you were going to immerse yourself in water, it meant that your body would absorb this water and force out other humours. Now, to be honest, where they're coming from is not right. But obviously, if you're feeling a little bit sick, if you've got a cold, and you immerse yourself in really hot water with scented oils and things like that, it's like having an inhalation. You're going to have snot and stuff coming out of everywhere. And they saw that as an imbalance in humours. So what they would do would be to preemptively take blood to make space for the water that you were going to absorb.
My goodness. Bon appetit, Sari, by the way.
Mangez-vous bien?
Why perfumes came to be.
Well, perfumes were necessary. Everyone had perfumes. It's not a new thing. Essentially, it's just to avoid stench. Ladies in the 1700s, in the time of Marie Antoinette, you would sew little packets into your gussets of your armpits, and once again into your the crotch part of your dresses. Gentlemen, you would have cod pieces, which is essentially a box around your male private parts, which you would stuff with herbs, scented wax.
Ah, there you go. So
if you wanted to.
They did use herbs.
For perfumes.
Lucy, very good. Back then it was Chanel #1. Now we're up to 56 or something. But it was the Hungarians. It was not the French who invented perfume. The French industrialized perfume. And there's a great movie starring Dustin Hoffman. It's a better book, but it is called Perfume. And you can learn a little bit about that because that was do you remember that movie, Steph?
I've seen, yeah. It's got Ben Withall in it as the main guy, doesn't it?
I don't know, but Dustin Hoffman's in it, and he's like a famous perfume maker, But men also would wear a nosegay, right?
Yeah.
A nosegay, like a little, a bouquet.
It's a little bouquet, yeah.
A corsage, all these things. When you had and everybody takes it to the prom now. They don't even realize where it was coming from because everybody buys corsages for their girlfriend, for the prom. And it was that you're basically saying, oh, you're probably going to stink later, so you want to, put that up by your nose. So, hi, Jill. We're talking about some really gross stuff right now.
Well, the first person who actually bathed constantly in the time of Louis the 16th is Marie Antoinette.
Ah.
Her mother, Maria Theresa, Empress of Austria, was a clean obsessive. She was also very lusty. She was pregnant for 22 years solid. She had 16 surviving children. And the reason that she did this was she said, if you want to keep your husband happy, bathe every day. So Marie Antoinette was the first monarch, the first queen to bathe every day.
And the first one to actually smell decent.
Yeah.
When did they get into the big bathtubs? When was the transition?
So in like the big metal ones.
Yeah.
Middle of the 1700s.
Okay.
Because when you start bathing for 3 hours, you're not going to be sitting in a really tiny little tub.
Right.
So they begin to make them bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And remember, we're only talking about Western Europe at the moment. It's important to remember is that Asia, in Japan, China, so bathing was something people did every single day. If you didn't bathe in Japan, it was deemed to be the sign of the barbarian, and that's why you've got to imagine when the Christians arrived the Jesuits arrived in Japan, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and they got off their boats after having been on ships for 3 years and not bathing. The Japanese were horrified, and one of the insults for these traders was actually stinking demons.
Ooh.
Which I think is justifiable in that case.
It's just so crazy when you think about it. You know, we're down to this. You know, how many people have died since the beginning of time because of things that were just dumb. You know, they didn't know better. You know, we didn't know back then. Now we know better, and we've known better for a long time. However, it seems that it's a new revelation to wash your hands, where in the Jewish faith, it's always been part of something that we do before meals, after, you know, certain times. So it's kind of hard to understand how people didn't know that for all this time, you know? It would have seemed like perfect logic.
Well, but they also didn't know how disease was spread.
Right.
They weren't necessarily washing to stop germs and things like that. They basically knew if you washed your hands, you stayed healthy.
Right.
But whereas, and also water wasn't for necessarily, let's say, baptisms and sacraments. It was actually the act of washing, the act of ablution is itself a sacrament.
Right. I do know up until 1956, in schools, public schools, wine was the beverage that the kids drank. I'm assuming
Justifiably so.
More like grape juice, but that was until 1956. Wine, and thank God, I'm sure they were very happy. But can you imagine? Not a juice box, but somehow they were drinking wine, and it was better for you in those days. Nobody drank water like we think about today. Nobody had bottles of water. It didn't happen.
But you've also got to remember that the wine in that time was nowhere near as strong as it is today.
Sure.
Right up into from the medieval period, right the way up until the 1700s, it was expected that a man would drink about 1.5 gallons of wine or about 2 gallons of small ale or beer per day.
How many?
Per day.
Oh my God. Exactly, yes. Lucy. Exactly. The Jews were more, exactly. So, Stephanie, can you talk a little bit about how during a lot of the plagues, Jewish people didn't get them, and then people blamed the Jews for, you know, actually giving the diseases, thought that we were doing that.
Well, it's actually, I should just say, in terms of the fact that the Jewish population didn't die, it's a bit of a myth. It didn't necessarily die at the same rates. One of the big things is in the medieval period, in all cities, major cities, you would have a Jewish area. You'd have a juiverie. We can call them ghettos now today, where the Jewish population lived. They had total autonomy over their area. And so because, as you said earlier, water was so important in Jewish daily life, from cleaning yourself to cleaning your house, you know, there's a reason that it's all like, who must know the way to make a proper home?
Right.
So essentially what we're going to see is that they would build water fountains, and they would have them fresh running water fountains, which they always had access to. And so they would congregate around wells. Christians had a deep fear of water in general, as we said, and so they would really use water for cooking and for cleaning, and they'd get it from the local river or culverts within a city. Well, when they see Jews hanging around wells or going to get water, they get suspicious that there's so many of them there and blame them for poisoning them. And this gives rise to 31,000 Jews were arrested, executed, forced to convert during 1348 to 1351.
When they were just standing out around the wells telling jokes.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's just crazy, you know, you learn so much.
But I mean, we're seeing that today. If you go on Twitter, I was watching David Pakman doing a small video on this. The Twitter is once again rife with this idea that it's a conspiracy. So in times of privation, times of danger, essentially it's always going to be minority groups, and especially, let's say, historically persecuted minority groups who are going to get blamed.
Well, exactly, right, Sari? Yeah. See? Oh, bye, Jill. Well, we'll talk about wine. Don't worry. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll be drinking wine next time, actually. Just remember that. But also, just in terms of Jewish links with the plague as well, just bringing up something that I mentioned earlier, is that it's about communication. And as the plague goes on, people start getting more interested in looking at reasons for the potential plague. And so they're studying books as much as possible. And I don't know if you've ever seen this book. Do any of you know what this is?
Can't see it. Ah, that's the little hats we used to have to wear.
Yeah, it's a Haggadah.
Ah,
and this was actually, it was made by a Jewish scholar, dates back to the 14th century. So now imagine Christians, some Christian opens this book, he's like, dude, Jews turn into birds and do magic. They must totally be responsible for the plague. So actually, there was just some cartoonish called Shlomi being like, oh my God, Moisha, I've got an idea for Haggadah. It's going to be great. Moisha's like, dude, I told you. And so also there's misinformation and disinformation being put out as well into an atmosphere of fear. But we must not let a plague break up society in any way, shape or form. So keep friendly, guys, keep friendly.
So how many minutes is that, Steph? What are we at right now?
We've done 45 minutes. Yay!
Wow.
You poor people just listening to me nattering on 45 minutes.
For free. But by the way, we're going to try to incorporate this and try to figure out how we can do some online classes now that everybody's at home. This is a great way to teach your kids about everything. Really, we're trying to stay as positive as we can because obviously, like plenty of people in tourism and restaurants, nobody has any work right now. So we're lucky here in France. They are going to be helping small businesses. So we are very happy about that. Although it's going to be a long, long road. So we're going to try to stay as happy and positive as we can. And we thank you all for tuning in. I'm hoping people can share this. I'm hoping people watch this. Please send us any questions by any way you can. I want to thank Stephanie. I want to thank you all for joining in. And we love you all. And wash your hands. And stay away from each other and stay home. Okay? All right, Steph, I love you. I'll call you.
Much love. Bye.